Hi, welcome to Get Used to It. I'm Sheila Kuehl, your host or hostess, and we are here again to talk about an issue of interest and concern in the gay, lesbian, transgendered, bisexual community, and for all the rest of you, because inclusiveness is what we're about. Today, I wanted to explore a topic that is a little unformed, I think, in the American consciousness because it's so deeply embedded in everything we do and see. And that is, how do we intentionally work to change public opinion or to create public opinion, to craft it? We kind of think about advertising, we think about campaigns, but I wanted to talk today to our guest to see how it is in the broadest sense. We come to these conclusions. People seem to feel better and better every day about the gay and lesbian community in some aspects, in other aspects, not. So my guest today is Pacy Markman, who is a partner in Zimmerman and Markman here in Los Angeles, an advocacy firm that works on political campaigns, initiative campaigns, advertising, issue advertising, or opinion development, all of those things. And for the past almost 10 years, Pacy's been a partner with Bill Zimmerman in this firm. Welcome, Pacy.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Really good for you to be here. And I wish that I could craft this question much more strictly so that we would kind of understand it, but I'd kind of like to just really sort of jump in and explore your role, really, in how you see it in kind of, the end of the 20th century and everything we're doing to try to develop public opinion about our community. So let me start way back, not too way back for you, but the way I usually do. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Baltimore, the 40s and 50s. And Baltimore's a very strange city because we think of it as a northern city, but it had a lot of southern attitudes and a lot of southern practices. And when I was growing up, it was a segregated city.
And so does that inform, or has it informed? I mean, always where and when and how we grow up does, but how did that kind of inform what you decided as a kid you wanted to do with your life?
Well, I don't think I knew early on what I wanted to do, but I was aware very early on, thanks to my parents who were very politically conscious and socially conscious, that there's something wrong at the very heart of the society that I was growing up in. For example, there was an intersection in downtown Baltimore. There were 4 department stores at the intersection. And when I was growing up, my father pointed out to me that blacks were allowed to go into the department store and to buy in the department store, but they weren't allowed to try on bathing suits or hats, and they couldn't use the elevators. Blacks had their own movie theaters, and I don't know exactly how it happened, but I became very conscious that this was wrong. I remember once we were poor, but I had a rich aunt, and she had a maid. And my rich Aunt Ruth would go to Ocean City for the summers, and she would not take her maid there because, as bad as things were in Baltimore, Ocean City was this far from the Civil War. And so this woman, who we called Lidgie, would come to our house, and one day, I was about 3 or 4 years old, I said to her, "You're my slave," and I didn't know any better. And she looked at me with a lot of love, and she said, "Honey, none of us are slaves anymore." And at that moment, I can't explain, I just thought, I've crossed some line, and became very aware of the relationship between whites and blacks. And when I went to college in Baltimore, and then I went to graduate school at the University of Rochester, an incredibly northern city, about as far north as you get, and it was amazingly segregated in the 60s. The early 60s. African Americans couldn't buy a house. They lived in a ghetto. And I got involved with the Congress of Racial Equality and became a strategist for them. I had never done strategy. And we were working at that point and trying to integrate the construction union in Rochester, and we didn't do a very good job. But that was the first time I began to see, well, this is interesting. This is something because I could see that I had some sense of how you motivated people and where the weak points were in an opponent's argument. That was about all I was bringing to the table.
But it's really
at
sort
that
of
point.
the beginning, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
really, those two things are really the essence of a whole industry in terms of public opinion. I mean, it's how do you motivate people to do or not to do something? And where the other side is pushing to motivate them as well, how do you reveal the weaknesses, as you put it, in their argument? Now, you hadn't thought you were going to be working in public relations or advocacy or whatever.
No, I was a graduate student in pure mathematics. I was going to be a professor and play logic games. And early on in that 2-year period, I realized I didn't want to do that. What I really thought I wanted to do at that point was to be a lyricist. So I got a master's degree, left, went to New York, and there were not a lot of jobs for lyricists at that time. And through a series of moves, most of them created by dire financial need, I wound up working in advertising in the city. And I was good at it.
In just regular advertising?
Regular advertising. I worked, the first campaigns I worked on were for the telephone company in New Jersey and Tanqueray Gin. And within a real short period of time, I was doing advertising for CocaCola and other products. And then in the early 70s, I created the campaign that launched Miller Lite, and I wrote the line, "Everything you always wanted in a beer and less." And I guess I think that if there's any penance or atonement, well, I'm not directly responsible for the great argument of the late 20th century of does it taste great or is it less filling. But overall, in working in mainstream advertising over a long period of time, doing ads that moved people to get their muffler changed, and or to drink one soft drink or another. I do feel I'm partially responsible for the death of the adjective in the late 20th century. Words like new, improved, excellent, terrific have no meaning anymore in our conversation because of what we did in advertising. And so that was what I was doing.
So what, it might be difficult to sort of wrap up given all of your experience since, but what were the early lessons for you in product advertising about just the two things that we were talking about? What motivates people? And I guess in product advertising, you don't have a direct argument with the other product, but there must be a way to show either why their argument is flawed, though you wouldn't call them arguments, I guess, with product.
I don't know that we approached it that way. Let's just talk about television advertising for a second. And you think about the nature of television. People watch television to be entertained. They don't watch television to be informed. It's just not where their head goes. And those people who watch television to be educated watch public television where there's up until recently there's been no advertising. And so people who are watching these programs and you come on with an ad for anything, an aspirin, a car, a beer, a candidate, an issue, you're interrupting their entertainment. You have to reach that person, in my opinion, in my experience, in an emotional way that's entertaining. You have to stay true to the form of the medium in which you're working. The rules are slightly different when you're doing newspaper advertising, but it's television in my lifetime that has been the primary way we reach people. And in order to reach people on television, you have to reach them by using the medium properly. So the first lesson I learned was that whatever I was working on, whether it was a ballot initiative and I'll talk a little bit, we can talk about that, or whether you're selling a product, you have to remember what the medium is that you're using and why people are watching it.
So since we're primarily using television, even now, it seems as though you're saying the primary way that we get people to move from one thought to another, and maybe there's a change of opinion involved, is through entertaining them.
And but I'm using entertaining in a very, very broad way. Terms of endearment made you cry terribly, but it was entertaining. We hear the word entertainment and you think that I'm just talking about laughter. I'm just talking about the big mistake that people in my business make and people in general make when they use television is they believe that they have to enter the heads and create some dialogue in their brain. The truth is people are moved by what happens below the neck, and the best of television advertising, whatever it's for, reaches people below the neck. That's what I mean by entertaining. It's emotional, and sometimes the emotion is anger, and sometimes it's sadness, and often it's laughter. But people don't turn on television, and you see a lot of political ads today, and they'll just be running a lot of type, or they'll show you newspaper headlines. Well, the truth is not a lot of people read newspapers, and they sure don't turn on television to read newspapers. Mm-hmm. So you have to respect the nature of the medium. That's the first rule of trying to move people for whatever you're trying to do.
And also, it seems like it sort of bypasses the head in a way. It's visceral. I mean, because television is a medium of images more than anything else, it seems to me that what we see gets in faster than what we hear, because we have to process that, but we don't process what we see. So the visual is very important, and it's become, with music videos, with all of the rapid cuts that we see in movies, it's become even more important, it seems to me, to make certain that the visual sends the message right away.
There used to be there are all kinds of rules in advertising, and every one of them has 100 counterexamples. But one of the first rules was, in television, you have about 2 or 3 seconds to grab somebody visually. It is a visual medium. As you were talking, I was thinking that back in 1978, when the Briggs Initiative was on the ballot here in California, I was not out at the time. I was sort of in what I've come to discover was a glass closet. I thought I was in a closet, but everybody knew I was gay. And I was very concerned. This was the No on 6 campaign. And I got to David Mixner, and I said, through a mutual friend, and I said I would do the advertising for the campaign on the condition that I didn't have to go to a lot of meetings. And that at that time, for that campaign, we were actually able to get the work done for free. There was the concern in the community, and I know we're going to talk about what has changed in 20 years, but there were enough people who could do production who helped us out. But the message that we went with in that campaign, the message I came up with, I put on the screen, and we did do advertising. People forget that. We spent several $100,000 in advertising. I found a straight teacher in San Francisco, and I put her head up her hair in a bun to make her look just like your second-grade teacher, and she talked about how terrified she was by what this initiative might do to her, how she could be fired for what she thought and what she said in the classroom, and even though she wasn't gay, if she felt it was okay for there to be gay teachers. That was an example of of respecting the medium, and you could feel her fear, and she was afraid. She was telling the truth.
How did you get from CocaCola to the Briggs Initiative?
I was out here. I was the creative director of a big agency out here, and it was that, there had been in me, from the time I was growing up, this sense of, if something's wrong, I'm supposed to try to do something to fix it. I don't always do that, and I'm not the Dalai Lama, but this was a case where, as uncomfortable as I might have been at the time with coming out, I knew this was wrong. And I knew that I had skills that I could bring to it, because I'd been doing advertising that people saw on television at that point for 12 years or 13 years. And it was just that simple. I just dove into it because it needed to be done.
What have we found a lot of people in our community who did this? I mean, one of the differences in our community is that we've had the resources, and we've kind of had people already in place because we could be in the closet. And so we would perk along in our own little careers and suddenly have an epiphany about this, but already be at some of these places. Although I'm certain that there were risks for people for coming out in many of these industries. Still, the ability to gain the skills has been a little bit different for us.
Right, because we've been out in the world, and there have been very few. Unless we were out, there were very few limitations. I think that's true. I think that we have access to a lot of talent. I remember in the No on 6 campaign, it was very easy to get people to help us. I also remember that there was a big headline that ran in the LA Times that said, "Fear stalks No on 6 campaign." And the fear that they were talking about back in 1978 was the fear that you might be associated with the campaign, and if you were, that people might find out you were gay. In that campaign, we raised a lot of money in $49.50 contributions, because at $50 we had to report the names of people. Mm-hmm. That isn't true anymore.
You know, in the larger sense, I guess one of the things that intrigues me, because now I'm, I've been a candidate, obviously, in order to be elected, and the notion of, even in the small arena in which I am, where I have 400,000 constituents to convince, the question of how one appears, what it is that makes a person want to vote for you, or in the larger sense, vote for an issue. And beyond this notion of television advertising, the larger question of what it is that changes public opinion, kind of the elements that go into that. The fact, is it a kind of an ongoing, slow process? Every day 14 more people change their minds? Or is it more like what John D'Amelio was on the show not too long ago, and in his writing about the history of our movement, he talks about leaping and creeping, in which there will be almost like chaos theory. Something will come together, a lot will change, and then there'll be a period where we sort of consolidate our gains, or losses, or whatever. Have you seen that it's kind of like that with public opinion about our movement?
I think that I love the image of leaping. I used to talk about there are leapers, and then there are those people who make the leap, people who are very brave, people who come with great ideas. In physics, they're the Einsteins. And then along come the minions of people who sort of sweep up and fill all the places until some other
leapers and sweepers.
Leapers, sweepers, creepers, and the sleepers, the people who just, wake up and say, "Oh, things are great. I wonder how that happened." Uh-huh. What happens is you can have in the pressure cooker of a campaign, for example, that's one of the moments when you tend to make leaps. Everybody's galvanized. The media is already paying attention. You don't have to work so hard to get their attention. The other side is out there. You're out there. Those are the easy times in which to reach people, or they're potentially the easiest times in which to reach people. It's those lulls in between where events happen by happenstance, over which you just have no control. One of the dangers of sitting in the middle of history, which is, I believe, what we are doing right now when it comes to the fight for gay rights. It's been very compressed in time, and for somebody my age, it's incredible to me where we are. And if I'm 20 years old, I'd look and say, this isn't good enough. I don't care what you did 20 years ago. Nobody is going to fire me. Nobody's going to do this to me. I'm not going to, settle for anything less than the full expression of myself. But when we're talking about just 20 years, it's really hard to pinpoint within that time what happened. There's one of my favorite stories about the danger between facts and interpretation, is that at the end of World War I, Clemenceau, who had been the premier of France during World War I, was dying, and the German foreign minister came to visit him in Paris, and they were talking, and after wars, people talk like nothing has happened. And the German foreign minister said, something, history is very fickle, and over time, it may decide that it was France that caused this great world war we've just been through. And Clemenceau said, it is possible that they will say France caused the war, but history will never say that Belgium attacked Germany. And so when we look back over this period of time, it's real hard to say, we may, in 50 years, as gays and lesbians, have to erect a statue to Anita Bryant as the leader of our movement, because it may turn out that because the far right had such a sort of pleasant spokesperson in the early days of the in Miami in the late 70s, that it gave a face. That in turn galvanized us. I think of the campaign in 78 and the further campaigns as the first time we got together politically, where we actually cohered politically. And if that's what it took, well, that's what it took, you know. And so it's really hard when you look back over such a short period of time to say, oh, this was important, or that's the example, and we should try to replicate it. We can't. We're not about to recreate or invent enemies. We have enough of our own. But whether an enemy or somebody who's against us or somebody who gets public opinion will have exactly the same kind of platform that will move us the same way, that's very hard to replicate.
Well, it's an interesting concept, though, that the people who are most against us may be just the ones best placed to access an argument that we then have to meet, or to access the ability to make the argument that we then have to meet. There's a book that I have talked about in a number of contexts by a wonderful writer named David Garrow, who won the Pulitzer Prize for writing Bearing the Cross, which was the biography of Dr. Martin Luther King. His next book after Bearing the Cross was called Liberty and Sexuality. And the book was, I think, a kind of a mosaic, a pastiche of a lot of different materials. Sermons, diaries, newspaper articles, speeches on the floors of Congress, everything that he could get his hands on, to trace the history of the anti-contraceptive, pro-contraceptive, anti-choice, pro-choice movement along in this century primarily. And then at the very end, to talk a little bit about our movement, which was just sort of beginning to be public, as a way of tracing a kind of non-reproductive sexuality mode, which was and the same arguments were made against contraception, against abortion, and against us. Sex is bad if it doesn't lead to children, kind of thing. But it was interesting to me that out of this pastiche, I mean, you would see a number of very interesting facts. For instance, guess who wrote the very first anti-contraception law, which was adopted in a state, which was about the end of the 19th century was adopted, wasn't overturned until 1962, in this case in Connecticut, which established the right to privacy by the Supreme Court in the Constitution. P.T. Barnum. P.T. Barnum was elected to the legislature in Connecticut, was the chair of the Temperance and Other Moralities Committee, and decided that contraception was a really important thing. So I guess when he said, you know, a sucker is born every minute, he wanted to make absolutely certain that that was true by not having any contraception. And the first person to break this law, Katharine Hepburn's mother, who was engaged in, you know, this protest. So the book's full of stuff like this. But interestingly to me, what emerges from this mosaic is that you have people who are the brave people, who are on the forefront, who are the leapers. And they really don't apparently have any impact. They're thought of as bra burners or you know, crazy or radical, or they ought to be locked up, or they ought to be lined up against a wall and shot, as people said about students in the anti-war movement. Until you start to see a sea change in public opinion, when you start to see more balance in three major institutions in the country: the press, the pulpit, and the law, where you begin to get a little more balance from the pulpit, that maybe morality is about equality and not about discrimination or God's anger. Maybe in the press they start to use the word gay instead of homosexual, or they even start to report in any favorable way about our community. The law, the very first ordinance that says, you know, you can't discriminate in the workplace on this basis. You start to see this, and then it kind of becomes a little prairie fire, where this town, like we're seeing with guns now, or tobacco, where there's just a sea change in public opinion. It's not overnight. And I guess my question to you, as in terms of the work that you've done over the course of your lifetime, is how do we intentionally push that to happen? Not just in those 3 institutions, because the press is kind of like television as well. It's also entertainment. The pulpit is all people who speak with some authority morally, etc. Is it all intentionally done? Do we push all these buttons, or how does this happen?
Well, it would be great, but you have to understand everybody is out there trying to push exactly the same buttons. So how you get attention depends a lot on what I call this. We're playing in the marketplace of ideas here, and the marketplace gets roiled by events over which you have no control. Often it's taking advantage of something that happens, and sometimes we suffer because we don't take advantage of it. I think that we missed a big chance, for example, when the gays in the military debate was going on in Congress. I don't think the community coalesced well enough. I don't think we had a very good strategy. But that was handed to us. That was a moment where, in a way, we weren't terribly on the defensive. Usually we're on the defensive. When we're out there fighting anti-gay initiatives, we're on the defensive. And that's it's a very painful time. It's a very bad time to be proactive. I did the No on 9 campaign in Oregon. I did all the media for that. And it was very different. That was 92 than the campaign in 78. In 78, people were afraid to be associated with the campaign. In Oregon, you had straight people with lawn signs saying no on 9.
I'm not saying that you really know, Pacy, or that I do either, but it's interesting to me that these are not questions that really have answers, but something happens around the Thanksgiving table that's difficult. But young straight people are saying, no, you know, Mom and Dad, you're just wrong about that. Where do those ideas come from? Why was it different in Oregon?
I think, I'm convinced the biggest change is that the events that have, whatever they were, whether it's the No on 6 campaign here or Harvey Milk dying, living and then dying in San Francisco, what's happened over this last 21-year period is that people have come out. Familiarity breeds respect. I am convinced of that. There is no parallel in history for any movement where that's an action that gets any attention, because African Americans have skin color. You know, they don't have the luxury of being in or out, and it's one of the reasons when we deal with the African American community, we have to be very sensitive and say, oh, we have the same struggle as you do. Not quite. We don't have. But the act of coming out, I think, is the key to changing the broad level of public opinion. When we were talking before this, you said something about, I brought some numbers of changes in public opinion over the years. And you want
yes, sure, please.
Because they're interesting. One of them, these come from, they're available to everybody. They're on the internet, in Yankelovich and Gallup, and I've just sort of put some stuff together. But in 1992, and some of the numbers we have go back to 77. This is 92. In 92, 9% of the people. This is a general poll across the United States, so it's everybody. 9% said they had someone in the family who was gay or lesbian. In 1999, 7 years later, the number is 21%. That's a huge difference. Now, this is just people coming out. In 1985, 22% of the people in the country said that they had a friend or an acquaintance who was gay or lesbian. In 99, it's 55%. I mean, if I'm selling soap, I'm king of the world. If I'm running an election, I'm over 50. When I can move people from 22% to 55%, that is huge. And what is involved here is people coming out. That's, the good news of the polls. The bad news is in 1978, 53% of the people thought it was morally wrong to be gay. In 1999, 48% say it's morally wrong. So we have this disjunction. That said, when you look at, for example, do you think it's wrong to discriminate against gays and lesbians in the workplace? The numbers have gone over the 21-year period from something like 21% to 83% of the people.
think it's wrong to discriminate.
Now, and there are more numbers, but what these numbers tell me, and I'm not a big number guy, but what they tell me is that, as you put out, in the law, when it comes to the law, we're doing well, even though we haven't won victories. The public is actually way ahead of politicians when it comes to discrimination against gays and lesbians in the workplace. Way 83%. That's almost universal approval. It's the politics of our life. People are getting more and more comfortable with. The sexuality of our life makes them nuts. And that, I think, is exactly that's a continuation of what Garrow finds in his book. This country, for many, many reasons, not all because of gays and lesbians, has a big problem with thinking about, they look for titillation in a variety of ways, but the ethos of this country is uncomfortable with the idea of sex if it's going to be fun, which really leads back to just a sort of underlying current of Puritanism, which doesn't work anymore, which worked at one time. Puritanism was the philosophical basis of an economic system that made sense. In order to get you to work at terrible jobs that made you horribly miserable, I had to get you to defer pleasure and not to think about pleasure during the day. It was a bizarre idea, but in the Industrial Revolution, that's the only way you got people to work 7 days a week in mines and in horrible factories. It doesn't work anymore. You have people who want to be playful at Microsoft, where you want them to be happy in their work. The guy.
But you don't want them to sexually harass. I mean, we have.
Right. Well,
we're liars as Americans, no matter where we are. I mean, we pretend that we've separated the public from the private, and the public is a non-sexual place, and the private is a sexual place. And the public was always a man's world, and the private was always a woman's world. That's the way we divided it up. Jessie Bernard wrote a number of books about this, and she was absolutely right. But we were always cheating, because in the public place, we would have sexual harassment, innuendo, even sort of forced compliance, until we had all these laws about sexual harassment. And yet, it's interesting that people don't think that your private behavior should any longer impact your ability to work. And it's not just gays and lesbians, it's also probably 53% of people would say it's immoral to have sex outside of your marriage with other people. And yet no one hardly would say you should be fired for that. Right. Because it's a relationship question. What is that related to? Competence. And also, we want everybody to work. We want them to work and work and work. We want them to work 3 jobs, and then we want them to work out. I mean, we want them to work in America. So I think that seems like the first thing to fall. And in that sense, I do see a relationship with other civil rights movements, because I still remember watching Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. And it seemed to me that the movie was out quite a bit after it seemed more acceptable not to discriminate at work on the basis of race. It wasn't easy to get Title VII through in the 1964 Civil Rights Act, but still there was this ootsiness about whether your daughter was going to marry one. I mean, unquote. And it's kind of like that with us too. I think
that you're exactly right. I'm sure that, though I'm not sure, I suspect that if you looked at polling numbers on attitudes of white Americans toward African Americans, with some exceptions like Prop 209 and things like that, you'd see, absolute agreement that, equal rights every place and nobody should be discriminated. And then if you ask those same people, now how do you feel about African Americans marrying white people, the numbers would lag way behind. It's that area of American life that makes people uncomfortable. Our problem with the rest of society is not the homo part of our, our description. It's the sexual part, because we absolutely are not, with some few in vitro, counterexamples, having sex for anything other than pleasure,
Well, and we've tended to ignore or try to bury, because of that, right, that point, in trying to appeal to people's sense of fairness. We've incorporated our families who love us into this fight as well. I mean, it seems to me that PFLAG has been an enormous force, even though their numbers are not that huge. And maybe it hasn't, I don't know, but I love PFLAG so much because we all want the love of our parents even after we come out. And we've kind of projected that as a community onto PFLAG. Oh, somebody's parents love me, and they get the biggest applause when they walk in the gay pride parades, etc. Do you think that that has had an impact on America's opinions?
Well, let me tell you about a campaign we did for PFLAG. We were hired by PFLAG 3 or 4 years ago to do an advertising campaign for them. At the time, we felt this is a case where I'm comfortable with the civil rights parallel. In the civil rights movement, in many cases, it took white people to talk to white people about civil rights for African Americans. It may be for part of what we're struggling for, that it may take straight people to talk to straight people. These are the best straight people we're ever going to find because they have the heartfelt experience. It's back to the vignettes I gave you about how we talk to people on television. A mother talking about her son on television, I have a lot of trouble being angry at that person or discounting what she said. So we came to PFLAG with a sense that this was an incredible organization that could occupy a platform it wasn't yet occupying. In the gay pride parades, we all, it's one of those situations where we know them, and we love them, and we get it, but the rest of the society had never heard of them. And really what they did was they came to us and said, we want to do a nice campaign. And the truth is, you can do a nice campaign that says, my son is a doctor, we love him, and he's gay. I mean, that kind of campaign. But to move people, you'd have to spend hundreds of millions of dollars because people don't want to, when those people turn on television, they don't want to hear about abortion, they don't want to hear about any of these social issues when they're watching television. It makes them uncomfortable. When we did the campaign in Oregon in '92, in 2 years, over the 3-year period before that, there had been an anti-abortion initiative that they had beaten back, and there had been an anti-gay initiative which they had lost about gays in the executive department of government. And the people told us when we would do focus groups and polling, we don't want to vote on this. They don't want to think about this. So how do you get people, so we looked at this, we didn't have the money to do a long-term national campaign, and we also didn't think that it was going to do much good for them. What we thought, what we wanted to do was to get PFLAG to be those spokespeople in the national press. How do you get them to be the spokespeople we think they should be? And what we did was we did 2 commercials to provoke a national debate, and the commercials just factually married this, and visually, the statements of people like Pat Robertson and Jesse Helms and Jerry Falwell.
You know what? This is television.
Oh, we can show them.
So I think what we should do is to look at those 2 30-second commercials, because I know that you would rather see them because you're watching television than to listen to Pacy describe them. So as a favor to all of us, here are the 2 30-second spots that Pacy did in the PFLAG campaign.
Homosexuality is moral perversion and is always wrong. God hates homosexuality.
Homosexuality is an abomination. The practices of these people is appalling. It is a pathology. It is a sickness.
A lot of us are sick and tired of all of the pretenses of injured innocence. They are not innocent.
It is estimated that 30% of teenage suicide victims are gay or lesbian.
Homosexuality is an abomination. The practices of these people is appalling.
God hates homosexuality.
Many of those people involved in Adolf Hitler were Satanists. Many of them were homosexuals. The 2 things seem to go together. It is a pathology. It is a sickness.
My son Paul was brutally murdered. The FBI said it was a gay bashing.
Paid for by parents, families, and friends of lesbians and gays.
Pacy, that's very strong, very strong. Did those get on the air?
We actually got on the air in one city. We were on the air in Houston for a few days, and then Pat Robertson's group threatened to sue every station that ran them, and we became a national story. And suddenly there were front page articles about PFLAG. Frank Rich in the New York Times wrote a couple of editorials about it. We were a 5-minute piece on the Dan Rather newscast where we reached millions and millions of people. We were budgeted to reach a few million people. And PFLAG moms across America were going on radio stations, on talk radio, which is where people hear the social dialogue they don't necessarily want to see on television. So in a very compressed, short period of time, we were able to provoke a debate and to do a small part at making PFLAG a natural group of people the press would go to for comment or for interviews when something happened. And so I think it was really a successful campaign.
Well, now that's another interesting piece, is that when the advertising or the initiative campaign itself gets to be news, and there again I guess we have our enemies to thank in a way, because the more visible they make a protest to something, the more access we have, because again the media is saying, well, they've gotten to the place where at least they'll allow debate. I still don't like debating anybody about whether I'm a human being or not, but at least it's not all on their side anymore. It's now we get to answer why we want to do this, etc.
Well, I think that whether we like it or not, the media covers conflict. That's what they love. That's what makes it interesting. They're not interested in just telling nice stories. They want people on both sides. We rarely get the chance to provoke the debate. And so on the one hand, we can be grateful sometimes for what the other side has done. But the truth is, if you look at the Oregon campaign or this upcoming ballot initiative here in California, and back to the No on 6 campaign, they all had ripple effects in the community that were helpful. But we don't win anything when this stuff happens. This is not like, oh, something great is, maybe we win something in the night campaign. But in general, all we do is hold the position that we had. And we spend millions of dollars to do that.
Although it didn't, I think I heard you say that even though we're in a defensive position and we haven't gained anything, that is, there's not a new law protecting us, etc., in the realm of public opinion, simply because there's more discussion about it, it seems to me that these are times in which we gain something or potentially gain something. The Night Initiative will probably have to spend $10, $11, $12 million if we can raise that much, and I hope we can, to defeat this initiative. And yet at the end of it, if all we've done is defeat the initiative, we still may have gained something because we're talking. We're maybe heard.
Well, there's a really good thing that happens in these campaigns, because what happens is we draw towards us natural allies, and often they say that. What we tried to do in that PFLAG campaign was to, instead of persuading people that it was okay to be gay or it was okay to have a son who was gay, what we we drew them to our side by saying, hey, we share a common enemy. You people in the who are fighting for a woman's right to choose, these are your enemy too. We're all in this together. What happens in these campaigns, and this is, I think, one of the failings of this movement, if there is a movement, is that we're very good in drawing allies to us, and we do persuade people in the course of a campaign, and opinions get changed, and the more reasonable and nonviolent and and humorful we are, the better it is during the course of these campaigns, and the more people who come out as a result of it. All of that dynamic is great. What happens is when this Night Initiative goes on, we're going to look for those natural allies to coalesce with us. When they have campaigns and when they have issues, we're nowhere to be found. We miss the point. We successfully can make the arguments to African Americans that you are the experts on discrimination. This is about discrimination. And we can win some people that way. But when 187 was on the ballot here, which was an anti-immigrant ballot, or 209, which was, I think, a racially motivated ballot initiative, there was no sense in our community. We have to join that. We are missing, it may be off the topic, but that's an incredible opportunity that we miss. Because these coalitions, the more those are the people we want to carry our message. Those are the people at the dinner tables we want to be saying, oh no, you're wrong. I know these great people. You're not talking from experience. You're talking from somebody's placard. You're talking from somebody's hate-filled poster. You're not talking, if you had any experience, you'd never say that.
Well, this notion of hate crimes, in the most terrible sense, I think has begun to show more and more to people as the connections are made, and we're again not making them well enough. But for us to show up when the Jewish Community Center is attacked, and to be, and we should be, at all of the gatherings mourning these hate crimes. For us to understand that the same men who burned synagogues in Sacramento were the ones who killed the gay couple in Reading. The gay community and the Jewish community see across somewhat of a chasm, not so much, each other and say, I know you. I understand your grief. You're right, it's not happening enough. I mean, it happens on the floor of the Assembly all the time, because I look across the floor at Darrell Steinberg from Sacramento, and we understand that we have just gone through the same thing. But we have not, I agree with you, Pacy, been there, and we have to be there more, because you can't just ask and ask. But we also have some aggressive, I think, sort of positive work, which may or may not be successful, but I'm thinking of GLAAD, for instance, that in the anti-defamation arena, it seems to me that we have not just been reactive, or maybe we have. What do you think about that?
Oh, I think that I want to now add to the list of reasons why things are better. With people coming out, is television coming out. I make my money running ads, but the truth is that we're helped probably a lot more and more consistently if there are characters and storylines on television that reach people consistently week after week. We can never afford that kind of advertising. And I think that, I mean, it's astounding to me. When I grew up, there was no word gay, and to find the word homosexual, I had to look in an abnormal psychology textbook in the library secretly, just to see the word in print. Today I can turn on my television and hear people joke, and we can make fun of ourselves on television. You can't underestimate, don't underestimate the importance of that for moving and changing society. Because in a sense, people who watch those shows have that experience as if it's real.
Although, just today in the paper, there was an article, I'm sure around the country, I saw it in the Los Angeles Times, essentially complaining that very much in the same way as people of racial minorities have said, you can't even see people of color on television anymore, and when you do, they're in minor roles or very unrealistic. We have said, and I can't remember if it was GLAAD who said it or some other a group has mentioned it, and I apologize to GLAAD if it was you, that we do have a few characters on ABC, a few characters on NBC, but without exception, they are white men who are asexual. I mean, they don't act gay. They say they're gay, and maybe a little bit, because we don't want to go the other way, have them be too affected, be making fun of them. But we certainly do not see their personal lives. We don't want to deal, the sexuality on television is all straight. So it's kind of like, yes, we get there, but we're not in control of how we're portrayed.
No, but it's from where we were in a short period of time, that's where we are today. Is it enough? No. I mean, that's a given, but it's happening. One of the other things that we sort of gloss over, when you were talking about those three pillars that were going to change things, the pulpit, the law, and the newspapers, and the press, one of the things that's happened is that we have people who are out in the press. I don't know anything about a newsroom or a newspaper or a newsroom on a television station, but I know that has to change, have changed the climate of what stories get covered, what jokes get said in the press room to start out with, but what stories get covered and how they get covered. It's not a perfect world. When we did the PFLAG campaign, We tried to run a print ad in the Tulsa newspaper, and we were unable to run this. Is 3 or 4 years ago, because it contained the words gay or lesbian. And unfortunately, I had no way to get rid of them because that was the name of the organization.
Right, right.
These are, I don't want to call it baby steps, but these are changes that are helpful. And our job is to keep pushing for more change, but they are changes that are helpful.
Well, in the line of pushing for more change,
Okay.
and sort of in the large ballpark sense, you think of the United States and the 200 and some odd million people in the United States. The goal, I think, is for them generally to see us and allow us to be fully human and fully integrated into American society, you know, without artificial barriers. How do we continue to push those buttons, whatever they are, in a vast number of ways, or you know, in some number of ways? If you were suddenly made the czar of the campaign to change America's minds forever about us, and if that's the goal, and you may not even agree that's the goal, how would you go about it in the whole panoply of available ways?
Wow. First of all, I like the title, and, and I just want to know about the furniture for my office.
Furniture would be magnificent,
Okay.
I assure you.
Yeah. The parallel with the civil rights movement, we can go back to that again here. The first thing you can do, the thing you must do before you do anything, is to get every protection that you require from law. That's the beginning. Because the truth is, I want to be respected by people, but that may not happen in my lifetime. We're fighting hundreds and hundreds of years of a thinking, of religious training, of social conditioning that says it's wrong to be gay. It's just the reality. So while it may take maybe not hundreds of years, but it may take a while to change those people's minds. At the beginning, you want every protection that you can get under the law, so that people, whatever people think, if they act on it in any way, they have to know that there's some consequences, whether it's in the job place or walking down the street. You want to limit the behavior, and then the thinking will take care of itself over a longer period of time. But what I want to do is, in every instance where I have some control over what people do, that's where I start. It's much harder to affect what people think. And the truth is, I really don't care what people think about me. I don't care.
And yet, it is, I mean, there's a kind of a circle, because lawmakers do care what people think. And even though it's acceptable for me to bring a bill that would protect gay students, I can't get everybody to vote for it because they're worried about what people think.
It's, you know, lawmakers, you excluded, lawmakers want to be somewhat behind where the public is, where the voters are. They rarely want to be ahead of the voters. So our job is to then move the voters in along those areas where we want the lawmakers to take action. And when we have the voters, we need to announce it to the lawmakers. For example, one of the poll numbers that I noticed, and it came out right after Matthew Shepard's death, was that 75% of Americans across the country, 75%, believe that gays and lesbians should be added to as a category for victims of hate crimes under the hate crime law. That's a huge number. I don't know that we've done a really good job of getting that out, district by district by district. My experience has been in politics, whether we're working on handgun violence, is that when I can tell lawmakers that the people in your district are so far ahead of you on this, that it's perfectly safe for you to take this position, that you're not going to have any electoral consequences, then they'll take the position. So our job is to move the people, and then to announce it to the lawmakers in a powerful way, using the media and using advertising if you have to use it, using the mail, having people call up, whatever it takes to move particular lawmakers. That's our job. And And once we cover those bases, which may take a few years, it may take 20 years, whatever length of time it is, at the very least, that's the stuff I know we can do, and that absolutely has to be done. The way people think will change. It will change based on their personal experience. It will change based on the way the rest of society views them. In the same way that it's anathema for somebody to light up a cigarette now, it may be anathema for somebody to tell a joke about fags in 5 years or 10 years. We'll limit behavior that way. And then the thinking will follow, or it won't, but there will be no consequences of their thinking on us.
Pacy, this has been great. I'm really, really grateful to you for, coming here and talking about this today. And I'm, a great admirer of your work and of Bill Zimmerman's work. It's very important. Doesn't get a lot of respect when you talk about advertising or campaigning, because people, although they're amenable to manipulation, don't like to think that they're ever manipulated. And yet, it's really sifting through ideas and coming to our own conclusions, I think, that lead us to decide, I will or I will not hate or discriminate or love or accept or tolerate or whatever it is. So keep up the good work. All of you out there, I hope you enjoyed this hour, and that you will do your very best to contribute something every week to just changing one person's mind if you find someone in what you'd consider a negative mindset about us. Because really, at the end, what we really want for America, vis-a-vis the gay and lesbian community, is they better just get used to it.